What is it?
Audio quick clear.
Good.
What is it? Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we don't have the other paper, so she's reading or whatever, you don't know.
Really?
Yeah, nobody has other paper, so
Okay, that one will be very quickly supplied.
She's reading what you don't know.
We'll proceed.
Number 7, questions and statements.
Bora umetumia hii nini? Kutumia Chrome.
This new dispensation of questions. We will have Honorable Robert
No, hata sikai. Najua nafaa kuwa huko. Nimeacha mtu mwingine huko.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask question number 8, 2018, to the Cabinet Secretary for Education.
Next is a honorable member for Homa Bay Town constituency, Honorable Kaluma. It's in the order paper, Honorable Kaluma.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, let me just get it. Yes, Mr. Speaker, I thank you. Mr. Speaker, this is to the Cabinet Secretary for Education, and I would want the Cabinet Secretary for Education to clarify the 3 questions on the order paper. Number 1, we indicate the number of government scholarships that have been granted to the government of Kenya by friendly government since 2013. Number 2, to provide a detailed list of beneficiaries of the said scholarships from 2013 to date, and the criteria for identification of the beneficiaries.
There's a 6.
And number
So it's okay,
3,
it's okay.
to provide
A, B, and C, because if you say 1, 2, and 3,
Yes.
it looks like there are 3 different questions.
Yes, I thank
And
you.
yet this is one question
Yes.
with specific details.
Yeah, it is one question,
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, and what I'm emphasizing is that we have so many opportunities, some of which, Mr. Speaker, we are not even taking. So we want this audit as members of Parliament representing the people to secure that we can take all these opportunities. I thank you for the time.
Noted. That goes to the Parliamentary Committee on Education and Research, and it will be answered in that particular committee. Next is the honorable member for Busia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is directed to the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Infrastructure, Housing and Urban Development.
Inafaa kuwa?
I'd like us to put in place to ensure strict compliance with the National Transport 500 kilometers, or is to be driven for more than 8 hours, and that a driver of a commercial vehicle shall rest for a period of at least 1 hour for each period of continuous driving of 4 hours. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. That will be replied before the Departmental Committee on Transport, Public Works and Housing. The next member is the Honorable Member for the Honorable Caleb Kositany. And I really hope the members now can be supplied quickly with the order. Member for Kajiado Central, Honorable Memusi. Honorable Memusi. In absence of the member, the question is dropped. Next is the member for Moyale constituency, Honorable Kalicha Wako. Wario. Absent. Question dropped. Member for Mumias East constituency, Honorable Achiali.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to ask question number 14 of 2018. I ask the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury and National Planning. Could the Cabinet Secretary explain the policy framework that guides licensing of sugar importation in Kenya? I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. That one will be replied before the Committee on Finance and National Planning. And that marks the end of that particular order. Next order.
Order number 8, the Constitution of Kenya, Amendment number 2 Bill, National Assembly Bill number 5 of 2018, second reading.
Very well, and I am informed that Honorable Jimmy Nuru Angwenyi had a balance of 4 minutes. If he is in the House and is willing to finalize his minutes, he has the floor. Since he's not in, we'll give the next member who is interested to contribute to this one, and that would be Honorable Professor Oduol Odhiambo. Were you interested in speaking to this one, or were waiting for something else?
Something else.
Well, then we'll go to Honorable Martin Owino, member for Ntiwa. Something else also? Yeah. What is this something else that you are waiting for?
The motion.
Okay, then I wouldn't give Honorable Amalo, of course, because he's the one who is prosecuting this particular one. So we'll go to...
I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now you see, Honorable Kaluma, you actually don't need to solicit for these things because you are fourth on the line and
yes.
You have been given the opportunity. So you didn't need to come here unless you are coming here to pay a courtesy call, which is not done here.
Election. Mr. Speaker, we were contemplating a situation where if we had an election in August and we have subsequent disputes around elections, we were looking at settling the nation by December so that if we begin our societal life the following year, we are able to proceed. Mr. Speaker, that will be jolted fundamentally. We just have the experience from last year. And I wanted to urge the members to consider what happened with those several disputes we had. We had even the first elections in October, which if there were any challenges, we would have gone again to December. And that was the wisdom of it. If we had elections in December of the type we had, Mr. Speaker, it means that we would be settling as a nation by the month of May of the year following the year of election. And that will, fundamentally disorganize, that year. Mr. Speaker, some people have mentioned that there are cultural issues that would make it better that we conduct elections in December. And Mr. Speaker was part of the team which went across the country collecting these issues. Mr. Speaker, if you go to Western Kenya, for instance, they have their circumcision, which is a cultural right, which is essential for that part of the society, in the month they tell you. But they'll also tell you, Mr. Speaker, that if you go to Rift Valley, the month that would be the best for Western Kenya for circumcision.
Honorable Kaluma, don't spend too much time on circumcision. Proceed, Honorable Kaluma.
Mr. Speaker, I know why Mr. Speaker is intervening. Mr. Speaker, Luos had their initiations of knocking the 6 lower teeth. And Mr. Speaker, I don't want to disclose those things, but in our Luo culture, we never circumcise as a rite of passage. We do it for good reasons as intellectuals and sharp people. For those very reasons, we know. So Mr. Speaker should not worry about my culture and me over the matter. But the point I was making, Mr. Speaker, is that if you look at the conveniences of the societies across the country, some will tell you we have this important cultural right within this period. Just in the same case, you go to Rift Valley, and they'll tell you that very month those others would prefer is the month they are busy with harvesting, our grains and our crops. So that the issues of the sectional conveniences of the societies alone, Mr. Speaker, is a matter that was treated as bombers, and is a matter we should forget. Mr. Speaker, that is not a matter that should lead us to changing the election date. Mr. Speaker, if you look at the other reason being given in the memorandum and, of course, in the debate is, of course, the budget cycle. But, Mr. Speaker, when you make a constitution and settle a matter within the constitution, it is cast on stones. It is those other programs which need to be reorganized in the statutes. If it is the case that our budget is being interfered with because we are having elections in August, in the second week on Tuesday, then, Mr. Speaker, what we need to do is to reorganize our budgeting so that our fiscal year ends in July or August of each year, including the year of the election. And, Mr. Speaker, there has been substantial reorientation and reorganization of our budgeting cycle in that line. Mr. Speaker, the suggestion I'm making as I oppose this particular bill is that let us not have a situation where a member comes and proposes an amendment which can be made by the House thinking it can be made. There is a fundamental constitutional issue which we need to interrogate around this bill. And, Mr. Speaker, the House must ask, if we were to move the election date to December, of course it is beneficial. In fact, for us who lost some months in the last parliament, there could be a compensation. But that should not be the only reason as to why we support this thing. Mr. Speaker, the issue here is, to me, very simple. If you move the election date to December by dint of this constitutional amendment being proposed by the floor, isn't it also real that we are going to interfere with the term of office of the president? Because remember, the term of office of the president is tied to the term of office of the members of parliament. In fact, they work together. And if you are going to alter the term of office of the president, is it then a matter, Mr. Speaker, that we can legislate a constitutional amendment over absent referendum? I know in terms of initiation, Mr. Speaker, it can be done, but we need to alert the mover of the bill that even if we were to pass it, this is a matter that subsequent to this parliamentary process, if we were to pass it, is still going to referendum automatically under the relevant provisions. And of course, it is clear there, because we are going to extend the term of office of both the president and the parliament, and that is a matter the Constitution requires a referendum over. Mr. Speaker, with all those, comments, I thank you, and I urge the members to oppose this. The settling of the election date in the Bomas process, for those who attended, like Honorable Manzo, Honorable Tiendamolo, will tell you was a very serious thing. But, Mr. Speaker, lastly, there is the major issue as to why we settled on August. For urban populations in the country, we've had a situation where during December, they are at home. As they are at home, if you are a resident of Nairobi, for instance, other people are electing for you the representative you'll be returning from home to live under. While at home, Mr. Speaker, you are imposing a leader on a people there, a leader you yourself will not be served by, but a leader you will live back in Homa Bay as you live in Homa Bay, in Nairobi. So we were contemplating a situation where people take elections seriously and people participate in elections to be served by leaders they elect. Not that you go somewhere, you impose a leader, and then you go and live under a leader also imposed upon you or elected by people in an election you did not participate in. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I oppose this bill.
Okay, very well. Now, unfortunately, I do not see members in my list to my right in the top 10 for a reason I cannot explain. So it forces me to continue giving members to my, because if I were to go on record, there are the 10th person here actually is Honorable Gikaria, and top is Honorable Manzo. So I am at a loss whether to go to the 10th one, because even if it is balancing, you must also balance in terms of inserting your cards. So well, I will give Honorable Manzo and then look out for the 10th one, the other side. Honorable Manzo. And Honorable Kaluma says you are in the bombers. I actually
Yes.
do not remember anybody saying he saw you. Otiende, yes. Proceed.
Well, I was part of it, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving an opportunity to contribute on this very important constitutional matter. Mr. Speaker, this matter came in the last Parliament, and it had a lot of, support then, and it's a very, very important matter. Mr. Speaker, the issue which is being raised in the memorandum, one of them is the budgetary cycle, Mr. Speaker. There were challenges, Mr. Speaker, initially, but I believe we are able now to do our budgets and get the budgets read in concurrence with the situation in East Africa, as Kenya as a member of the Eastern African community. Secondly, on the matter of whether to interfere with the school holidays in December and school holidays in August, the date fixed is August 8th or thereabout. And if elections were to go smoothly, vote, the date will either be changed or fail to be changed. But fundamentally, Kenya is looking at a lot of other issues in the Constitution. And most probably, it could be good if, as a House, and because it's part of our responsibility, we frame quite a number of issues for referendum, because now is the time to audit the Constitution after 10 years serving the country. And I believe even if this particular motion does not go through, there is still that other chance of a referendum, and the responsibility truly of making Constitution is by the people of the Republic. And the people will decide whether they are happy on August 8th or December. People of Kenya have that particular opportunity. Should we not be able to go through in this particular motion? So in the two occasions, Mr. Speaker, the Kenyans don't lose, because I believe the Honorable Wamalwa is bringing this motion on behalf of Kenyans. And Kenyans still also have an opportunity to decide this particular matter in a referendum. So I want to state that, Mr. Speaker, we have several matters now which may be mature for referendum, questions to be framed, and then still this House will decide whether Kenya is proceeding to referendum or not, because again, it is the House which plays an integral part in determining whether a constitutional amendment is going to be done through referendum, or also for the schedules which follow within the House, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I want to say it is a heavy matter, Mr. Speaker. Members are open to debate, including myself. And so far, we've already now gone through 1 August election. Kenyans are familiar with the challenges we went through, and finally they were settled. And we believe now it's a decision which can either be made by this House or can be made by the Republic through a referendum and by the people. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that it's an open matter, it's subject to debate, and it's subject to voting. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. Then I will give Honorable Gikaria, even if he's way low in terms of, for purposes of balancing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to try and, Honorable Speaker, it's a little bit difficult, first of all, to say whether I support or I oppose this motion. But, Honorable Speaker, I think the critical part of this motion is to ask ourselves whether constitutionally it is going to affect the term of office of the President. Honorable Speaker, in the 11th Parliament, Honorable David Ochieng had brought a very substantive motion on this matter related to the same facts that Honorable Kaluma has alluded to. And he had a valid reason for us to be able to have pushed the election date from August to December. But, Honourable Speaker, the Constitution is very clear that our general election will be held on the second Tuesday of August in the 5th year. And I think, Honourable Speaker, it is important for us to look at what Honourable Chris Wamalwa was saying related to the change of election date. Honourable Speaker, our Constitution, Article 255, talks about amendment of this Constitution. And it reads, 255(1) says, a proposed amendment to this Constitution shall be enacted in accordance with Article 256 and 257 and approved in accordance with Clause 2 by a referendum, if this amendment relates to any of the following matters. And I don't want to read all of them, but I will go specifically to Article 255(1)(f), and it says the term of office of the President. Honourable Speaker, if indeed that changing the election date, we know, and this is a conversation that maybe again we also need to get some advice by the Supreme Court. Our elections were supposed to have been held on the 8th of August of 2017. Unfortunately, because of a repeat election, again it was pushed to the 26th of October. Now it means that if we push our election to December, then it means we will have exceeded the term of office of the President by almost a month or 2 months, if the elections are going to be held in December 2022. Unless, and I wish Honourable Wamalwa was here, we will be checking at his Hansard, unless he was saying we do the election in December of 2021. Maybe that would make December 2021. That would make some sense because it will not be moving the term of office of the President. But if indeed in his motion and on the Hansard he said that it should be pushed to December 2022, then I think, Honourable Speaker, not only will we just be debating in vain, Mr. Speaker. People will go to court, even irrespective of what, and it is not once or twice that we have sat in this Honourable House. We have passed some legislation which members of the public have gone to court, and those legislation have been termed unconstitutional. So, Honourable Speaker, it would only be fair for us to be able to look at the Constitution and respect that Constitution, because I think if we start going against the Constitution and of course I know, Chris Wamalwa was not doing this for purposes of us earning a few months' salary, maybe a month or two. I think he was genuine in his concern, and we were in Honourable David Ochieng's submission in the 11th Parliament, and he expounded, and it was true that others were not only about circumcision, as Honourable Kaluma was saying, others were saying it is the harvesting time, and people, and others, the nomads or these people who move from one place to the other, they say normally that is a very dry period and they are not in their respective areas. So Honourable David Ochieng had given, and of course I know Honourable Chris Wamalwa must have given very, very valid reasons. But for the purpose of the Constitution, Honourable Speaker, because under Article 256, the Parliamentary amendment, Honourable Speaker, does not, for us to sit here, we'll be doing a Parliamentary amendment. Sorry, Honourable Speaker, under Article 256, amendment by Parliamentary initiative. And I think, and again, and this is another question that we have always been asking, Honourable Speaker. Are we doing an amendment which, through a motion by Honourable Chris Wamalwa, is it a motion of Parliament, or is it an amendment by parliamentary initiative? And this, again, something that we need to be asking ourselves, Mr. Speaker, that it is not right for us members to be amending a constitution through just a normal procedural motion, or you know, it is not right. I think we need to take our constitution seriously. Let's not use this House for motions to amend. Honorable Speaker, it is important for us that, again, as we go, the talk of a referendum that is coming and it is all over, again, we need to sit as a House and see, is it okay to have a referendum that will be voted by the Kenyans? And could we pick what Honorable Chris Wamalwa has indicated here as part of the question which is going to be in that referendum? Because again, it is not easy, because the debate is ripe out there in the public. And people are saying the wage bill, we would want to reduce representation. Yet, Honorable Speaker, it is the same members who have said again they want a representation that is closer to them. And that is why we took devolution. That is why we have constituencies. That is why we have wards. Again, this is another aspect that we really need to look at, Honorable Speaker. And it is important, Chris Wamalwa, to look at a possibility of whether including that question, if indeed at any one time we are going to have a referendum, then this is a question that Honorable Chris Wamalwa needs to look at in future to bring to this House, and we consider whether it can be considered. Honorable Speaker, if you look at Article 255(2), and that is again on the amendment of the Constitution, and it says a proposed amendment shall be approved by a referendum under Clause 1 if at least 20% of the registered voters in 24 counties, that is under 2A, and B, the amendment is supported by a simple majority of the citizenry. And I think that is something that is very important. But however, Honorable Speaker, let me also indicate that this country, we are going through a very, very trying moment, whereby every single coin that is spent in this country should go to very meaningful development aspect of this country. And pumping an additional, again, over 20-30 billion for us to be able to have a referendum, just for us to be able to, when we are considering, among other things, that to have positions for a few individuals, I think, again, Honorable Speaker, I think this is something that we really need as a country to be able to look at.
Election on August, so that will pin petitions. So I don't see any difference of election being in December. That petition will affect that time. Also, the contest that you say that you cannot approach another year because we had election on December is not a point. Giving our people that you cannot give them the sound time which we need election. So, Honorable Speaker, I stand here to say that I don't support anything for referendum, but I support the day for election to be on December. Thank you.
Okay. So next we'll be trying to balance. Let's have Honorable Koi Waluke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me also a chance to contribute on this. Mr. Speaker, it is very important. I mean, this constitution, amendment is very important to this country, Mr. Speaker. The matter is important that as members of Parliament or this House, Mr. Speaker, we need to consider this election dates moving either from August to December or remain in August, as the Constitution says, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in my contribution, Mr. Speaker, the election in August affects mostly the schools. The schools are mostly affected because when we are doing elections, Mr. Speaker, interference in schools get affected. In my proposal, Mr. Speaker, I propose that we need to move this constitution, we consider to move it to December, when people are just relaxed. Many Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, are used to elections since independence. Always it is in the month of December, Mr. Speaker. And in December, Mr. Speaker, there is no any interference because people are now used going to parties, enjoying, you know, visiting other people, seeing their relatives. I think that time, Mr. Speaker, can suit us, can suit this country for election, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are so many things, Mr. Speaker, which us as members of Parliament consider, Mr. Speaker, like especially our children are important. We consider them to be more important than anything else, Mr. Speaker. And we need actually to move this election or propose to move election to December, Mr. Speaker. So I support this motion, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, very well. Let's have Honorable Dr. Makali Mulu of Kistui Central.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the chance also to add my voice into this important debate, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to say I'm not convinced that I should support this bill, this amendment to this bill. And I have about 5 points why I oppose it, Mr. Speaker. The first point, Mr. Speaker, is looking at what we went through to come up with a new constitution, the 2010 constitution, Mr. Speaker. The process was very consultative, Mr. Speaker, where very many Kenyans from all walks of life, religious leaders, serious lawyers like yourself, Mr. Speaker, professionals like myself, we all gave our voice to this debate on the new constitution. And we all agreed that we conduct our elections on the second Tuesday of August in the 5th year, Mr. Speaker. And I think we need to agree, Mr. Speaker, that there are a few who are still pushing for December. But we said August is the best time. The majority said August, Mr. Speaker. And it is very clear democracy demands that the majority will have their way, but the minority will be listened to. So, Mr. Speaker, since we got this new date, we have only managed to conduct elections once, Mr. Speaker, and that was last year, August. Looking at the old constitution, we conducted 9 times elections under the December date, Mr. Speaker. So I don't know what's the hurry for, Mr. Speaker, and maybe Honorable Chris needs to tell us what is really pushing him, because we have only gone through this process once under the new constitution, Mr. Speaker. And to me, I don't think once is good enough to start saying we change, Mr. Speaker. The second point, Mr. Speaker, is this issue of the budget. I hear people talk about the budget, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you realize last year, the 11th Parliament was able to pass the budget. And at the same time, we conducted our elections, Mr. Speaker. And were it not that we had another election after the main one, Mr. Speaker, at the presidential level, I don't think we'll have had any problems, Mr. Speaker. So unless Honorable Wamalo is telling us, Mr. Speaker, that come the next election, we still go again for the same process, I'm not convinced, Mr. Speaker, this is the time to change this clause. The third point, Mr. Speaker, is what Honorable Kaluma said. By changing this date, we might say no, yes, Mr. Speaker. The truth of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, we'll be extending the term of the president by about 3 or 4 months, Mr. Speaker. And the Constitution is very clear that once you do that, Mr. Speaker, then you have to go for a referendum, Mr. Speaker. And we can't really...
Nambale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm inclined to oppose this motion, much as I respect the views that have been given by Honorable Chris Wamalwa and the contributions of my colleagues to the contrary. Mr. Speaker, my first reason is just a matter of principle. We passed a constitution not long ago. I really would have liked the constitution to stay fixed without any meddling with it for 10 years or more. We should adjust ourselves to fit the constitution and not adjust the constitution to fit ourselves. For one, we have such diverse views, perhaps all valid, and we can't, depending on who has a majority, keep changing it on the basis that the majority would have their way. So, Mr. Speaker, that's my first argument. I really think the Constitution should learn to bind us, and if we do so, and as we change our own individual habits and collective habits to conform to the Constitution, we learn to accommodate each other because we negotiate our way through life to be able to conform to the provisions of the Constitution. Two, Mr. Speaker, sir, the issue of the interference with the school calendar works equally and favorably. It doesn't matter which month you take. Why? Because the election cycle, intensive election cycle, is about 3 months, although we tend to campaign for 5 years. But the very intensive election cycle is about 3 months. The longest holiday we have is 2 months. So whichever month, 2 months you take, there is going to be an extra month that will interfere with the school calendar. When you do it in August, you'll of course have been campaigning in June and July. When you do it in December, remember the exams are finished at the end of November. It means that at the height of our campaigns, we shall be making noises, beating drums when students are doing their exams. I do not see December, in respect of the school calendar, as being any better than August. August, there is some interference. It's time for recovery for the children, for the students, before they do their exams in beginning November. We have a whole range of customs. I know in my part of the world, the even years, if election is ahead, if it's an odd year, of course, it doesn't apply. But during even years, August is a very festive month. But I'm sure that we are going to learn to meet those rituals we do without the extra drama that we put to it over time. So I really think we should stick with the election calendar if it was in respect of that cultural dimension, because over time, the cultural dimension is going also to adjust to the times. Already, many people have adjusted to the times. Mr. Speaker, I really feel strongly that if we learned to obey and live under the Constitution, we would find no difficulty in staying with this for at least 5, 6 election cycles, and then let's see what we need to do. Let the House see what they need to do at that time. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, a lot of the points have already been raised. I wish to disagree, and I oppose the motion.
Okay, the Honorable Mbui Robert.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to also contribute on this very, very important motion, which is a bill to amend the Constitution to change the dates of elections for this country. Now, Mr. Speaker, I think the most important thing we have to ask ourselves is where we are, because apparently, when this bill was proposed by the Honorable Chris Wamalwa, it went to the committee, and the committee carried out public participation. Apparently, 80% of Kenyans from the 47 counties do believe that the dates that we have in our current constitution are not good, and they would propose that there is a change to December. So, Mr. Speaker, in that public participation, very major stakeholders, like the Kenya National Examination Council, the Kenya National Union of Teachers, KUPPET, and all others, were of the opinion that it actually does make sense to change the date. So I want to support this motion on the basis that we have to learn to listen to our people, because we are here to represent them, and if they seem to believe that one date is better than another, then it is our responsibility to support them. Mr. Speaker, previously I was opposed to this because it was brought to the 11th Parliament by the Honorable David Ochieng. I was one of the very, very few members of this House that opposed it because we were almost reaching the threshold of 2/3. We missed it by, I think, 6 people. I was one of the 6 that opposed it. But you see, now I am born again. Having sat very close to my colleague and listened to him, I think it's important that we do what is right for Kenyans. I've had arguments, Mr. Speaker, from our colleagues, and people are saying that, the date of August is bad because we have bad roads and there's heavy rains. And Mr. Speaker, I think the solution to that is not to fight the date, but to deal with the roads. That is why we are here. We pass budgets so that we can fix our roads, so that we can be able to operate throughout the year. We can't say we can do elections on certain periods because our roads are not good. We've got arguments here that it's unconstitutional. Mr. Speaker, I believe that for this motion or this bill to be presented to this House, this Parliament has got enough people within the legal office that have studied the bill and figured out that it is possible for it to be presented for debate. There is no way that a bill can find its way here when it is unconstitutional. So when we stand here as members and then we say, no, it is affecting the dates of the election of the president, and therefore it's unconstitutional, then we are also actually accusing our legal advisors within the office of allowing debate on something which is unconstitutional. So I want to believe that this has been thought through and that it is actually legal and fair for us to discuss, because I think when we pass this with the 2/3, then we will be able to achieve what we intend to achieve. Mr. Speaker, the 2010 Constitution, when it was passed, people have said that about 20% of it is bad. This is one of those few things. And, there is a lot of talk about a referendum in the offing. Mr. Speaker, instead of putting 1,000 questions in the referendum, let us remove some of those very basic ones, like this particular one of the dates. Let's deal with it as a House. Let's pass that. Let's change the date so that the number of questions in that referendum are reduced. Because the more questions we have, the more reason people will find opportunity to oppose it, and then we have a bigger fight out there. So let us reduce some of those very basic things. Those that we can change as a House, before we go to the major things, let us change. And this is one of them. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that my belief is this, that a natural calendar starts in January, ends in December. It would be very perfect for us to have an election in December, and then we start our term in January, and finish 5 years later in December, so that the next cycle again starts in January, ends in December. It looks very natural and very nice. But when you look at this thing of finishing the term in the middle of the year, then there are several things that in my opinion, are not working out. One, of course, has been said over and over by members, and that is the school calendar. There's arguments that the school calendar is not highly affected when we put the dates in December. But the truth is, if NEC and NAT and KUPPET are all the stakeholders in education are saying that the dates should be December as opposed to August, then I'm basically compelled to accept them and to agree with them. So basically on the issue of the school cycle, I think the professionals have spoken, and they also believe that the date of December is better. Mr. Speaker, the budgetary cycle, we have to read our budget together with our partner states within the East African community. And Speaker, it is important to note that there is a date specified in law within the 3 East African, now we are, I think, 7 East African countries.
Very well. So let me give Honorable Okwome Adipo, member for Karachuonyo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me a chance to say a word on this change of date. Mr. Speaker, it is a common knowledge that Kenyans are making efforts to have the constitution changed. Whether this will happen or not, we leave for the decision of the Kenyans. Because of this, I think we should actually think of changing the constitution as of that time. There is no need of piecemeal change of the constitution. Because if we start changing it this way, how many times are we going to change this? I'm saying this being aware that the change from August will affect the presidential tenure, and therefore the referendum will be a necessity. Mr. Speaker, sir, I would urge the mover of the motion to think of this carefully so that we move together towards changing this constitution. After all, by the time the 2010 constitution was being discussed, it was agreed that 20% of it was not quite satisfactory. Many people were still unhappy with that. And if that was accepted, it indicates and it actually acknowledges, it acknowledges the fact that we should change the constitution, at least to an extent acceptable to all of us. This is why I'm saying let us wait, let us not be too much in a hurry and destroy what we may probably find complicates the change at the time we need it. Mr. Speaker, this is my concern, and I thank you for having given me an opportunity to say this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now, again, let me give, I can't see, Karim Mangushine, Honorable Karim Mangushine, then Honorable Dido Raso.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to contribute to this motion. I believe honorable members have given their word on this. I rise to oppose this motion. Mr. Speaker, when we are elected to this House, we represent the people of this country. And the oath of office, we take it to protect the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, we cannot amend or attempt to change the Constitution on a whim. Mr. Speaker, there are democracies that we borrow from. The United States of America, the Canadians, the British. Mr. Speaker, since 1776 until around 1954, the Americans were able to change their constitution just 14 times. Mr. Speaker, the Canadians for 45 years did not make a single amendment to their constitution. Mr. Speaker, changing the constitution on a whim, it is a weighty thing that we in this House cannot abrogate to ourselves the knowledge, the expertise, or whatever thing to actually pretend that we can sit here to say that something is wrong with our Constitution. Mr. Speaker, in the army where I was for many years, they say that there's something called a loss procedure. Once you get lost when you are out in the field,
Honorable Speaker, I did not intend to disrupt my very good friend, the Honorable Member for Saku, but is in order to stand on this floor and posit that this motion by the Honorable Chris Wamalwa is a motion on a whim. A whim. My understanding of a whim is really something that is not serious at all. But if this motion has been set down for consideration of this House, it cannot be termed as a motion on a whim. So I think it is proper that he should withdraw that.
Unless there is a difference in the terming in the military, then what Honorable Dr. Chris Wamalwa, obviously, this is a matter which he has really put a lot of thought and work into, and should be given that kind of... I really hope you didn't mean that.
Not at all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honorable Chris is a good friend of mine, and we have really talked about this bill. Mr. Speaker, I didn't mean exactly that. What I meant is that this is a weighty matter, that it really needs us to go deeper in understanding our Constitution. So I didn't mean that this is frivolous, really. It is not at all. Mr. Speaker, in case we have serious misgiving to any clause in our Constitution, I think we must go back to the framers of this Constitution by coming up with certain clauses, dates, commission, or anything pertaining to this Constitution that affects the fabric and the basic nature of the Kenyan people and their way of life. I think we must ask the framers that what did you have in mind when you came up with this? Mr. Speaker, there are some excuses or what I would call reasons, such as examinations and school calendars. What I actually want to ask is what stops us actually from also amending our school calendars. Throughout the world, 80% of countries actually start in September to end in July. I think anybody can challenge that.
What is it, Honorable
Last year, we had a repeat election in which there was a mention that when the school calendar is moved a bit, our children will not die. And Kenyans reacted and overreacted on it. So he should actually concentrate on election calendar and forget about the issue of our children and the school calendar. Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker.
I know you have many of them, Honorable Sankok, and but proceed. I hope you get the. Yeah. What is it again, Honorable Dr. Pukose? Why all of a sudden you are all? What is it, Honorable Pukose? I think there must be a problem there because I've given
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Colonel Raso raised that schools in most jurisdictions start in September and end in maybe May. That is not our system. It is because here in Africa and in Kenya, we don't have winter, we don't have summer, we don't have all those what other Europeans have. Here our seasons, we are within the tropics and our schools start in January, not just in Kenya, but Uganda, Tanzania, and any other place. So I think that is a fact which is not right.
Okay, maybe as you wind up, Honorable Raso.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I find that has been very serious interruption, but I just want to concentrate that the date in December that has been suggested, I think it changes this Constitution in a big way. And I think we must go back and ask ourselves, what did the framers have in mind as they suggested that the second Tuesday of August during the 5th year or the election year is the best date? Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I don't in any way want to say that our school calendar is bad or it can be changed. But it is not a good excuse enough because the fear of attempting to change this date is all about electoral dispute. I think we must see how we can go around the electoral dispute rather than saying that let us change the date. With those remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to oppose.
Okay. Next on the line is Honorable Otsotsi. Otsotsi had already spoken. Okay. So Honorable Tom Oluoch has also spoken. I'm finding it difficult. Members who have already spoken are also queuing.
Juzi tu tumepitisha masuala ya ushuru hapa. Ukiangalia wananchi wanaumia na kikatiba, ukiangalia serikali za Ulaya katiba ilipiga marufuku na sisi bado tunaendelea kuzishikilia, kumaanisha katiba iko na tabu zake hapa na pale. Kawaida wa Kenya msimu wa Disemba mwezi 12 huwa anapumzika, na zile eneo bunge, manake mmesikia majuzi ya IBC wakisema kwamba wanataka kuondoa maeneo bunge, na kisa na maana Wakenya wengi kama mali kama kwangu kule Mwatate, hatuna kiwanda, hatuna nini, lazima watu wafanye kazi Nairobi. Lakini hizi kura zikiwekwa mwezi wa 12, wengi watatoka hapa na watapiga kura, na tutakuwa tumefikia kile kiwango cha ABC wanataka. Kwa sasa hivi ukiangalia, mimi kama mwalimu, mitihani iliyofanywa mwaka jana, kwa kweli watoto wengi hawakujiandaa sawa sawa, kwa sababu kura zilipokuwa zinapigwa August, kwa bahati mbaya za rais zikaongezwa mpaka mwezi wa 10, watoto wengi hawakujiandaa sasa. Na hili ni swala liko kwa wananchi wote wa Kenya. Wanajiuliza, kila hata ukienda mitani utasikia wakiongea. Sisi tulichaguliwa kuwakilisha wananchi wetu. So ni vizuri ili swala liangaliwe kwa undani, angalau pale katiba iko na tatizo ipigwe msasa na watu waende mbele. Hata wale ambao wanasema ati IBC iondoe mali nyingine. Hii Kenya ina ukabila. Tukisema tunapiga ati msasa kabila tuondoe mali nyingine, hii Kenya inataka wakilishaji wa kisawasawa, manake tuna ukabila. Ukiniwekea mimi na ukiwekea eneo bunge la Mwatate ama Taita Taveta County na kwingine, mtu amaliza Wataita tu kwa wadogo. So lazima tuangalie kwa undani hili swala. Mheshimiwa Chris Wamala, mimi nakupa pongezi kwa kuleta hii, na sisi kama bunge ni jukumu letu tuangalie mali msasa utapigwa, ama kama haiwezekani wananchi wakikataa tutachukua ya wananchi. Lakini ule kweli wa mambo, hii siku ya kupiga kura mwezi wa 8 sasa hivi ni tatizo kwa wananchi wa Kenya. Singependelea kuongea mengi, manake wenzangu wameongea, na mengi wameongea ndio nilikuwa nataka kuongea, na singependa kurejelea. So Mheshimiwa Speaker, ninashukuru kwa hii fursa umenipa. Asante sana.
All right. The Honorable Duale Dahir, member for Dadaab. Honorable Duale, you don't seem to be audible. Could you give him clerks? Could you give him another mic? Yes, that seems better.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to this motion. In the last Parliament, the same motion was brought by Honorable Cheng, and because it's affecting the Constitution, we missed to pass it by a small number. And I still think that this is a valid motion because it has also been approved by the House Committee, and that's why we are discussing it. For me, I want to say that I would like to support the motion, and for 4 reasons. One, first of all, the election cycle in this country takes place every 5 years, and during these 5 years, in the last year, this matter, the election cycle, will be affecting the budget cycle. And so in order to be in line with the budget cycle of this country, I support the change of date from August to December. The second issue, the second reason why I want to support this issue is the school education cycle in this country. We have 3 holidays in the country for students, particularly primary and secondary, but the longest holiday cycle is in November, December, and early January. And I think that by having the date of the election in December, it will not in any way affect the school calendar, and I think that is an appropriate time because everybody in this country, the number of children who go to school are many, and this is a matter which affects many Kenyans. So if the date is changed to December, many parents, including ourselves, will not be affected by the election. The third reason why I want to support this bill motion is because of the holiday season and the festivity. In this country, we do have the holiday season in December, Christmas, and also many people go for New Year and so on. And many people have an opportunity to be with their relatives back at home. And I think that we can actually increase our voter turnout, and many people can vote at home and also be part of the people who don't miss their votes. The other reason why I want to support this motion is because many pastoralists in this country, particularly in the north and the northwest, the August is a dry season, and many pastors may not be at their non-abode. And so, if the elections are held in December, the pastoralist community also will be where they are supposed to be at home, and they can actually they have plenty of pasture and water, and so they can actually participate in the election. So with those reasons, I support the motion, and I thank Honorable Chris Wamalwa for bringing it back. I would like to request all members of parliament to support it, because it is us, the Constitution allows us to amend through a two-thirds majority, and I think that if we can raise the required number, then we can actually change this date and make it convenient for many Kenyans to vote in December, as has been the case before the new Constitution. With those many remarks, I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
The Honorable Duolo Odhiambo.
On the next.
Very well.
Yeah.
Very well. The Honorable Martin Owino. Interesting. The Honorable Odanga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to rise to support the motion as brought here by the Honorable Chris Wamalwa for the reasons that, one, this particular motion went through public participation, which is a process that is allowed by the Constitution of Kenya, and that many Kenyans, as we heard, having been of the idea that the date of elections be moved to December because of all the reasons that have been brought here by the members. Then, as members of this assembly, I think it should only be our honor to the people of Kenya to support what they have already proposed to us. The elections that were, Mr. Speaker, in August, we saw that after those elections, it really took a long time, particularly after the presidential election had issues, for Kenyans to settle down. Even the schools were affected. Our children, our teachers, who take a lot of participation in the election process, and the parents were all affected. And it really took a longer time, and it affected even the process of the examinations and any other activities that are very important to this nation. Before the passage of the new Constitution 2010, it was generally agreed that about 20% of the Constitution wasn't in tandem with the thinking of all the Kenyans and needed some amendment. And I think this is high time that we do agree with those Kenyans, the church, religious groups that really had issues with the several issues constituting about 20%. And this is one of the issues that we need to amend moving forward. Mr. Speaker, August also is just 2 months away from the budget process. And even last year, before the elections, that budget that was read was done very hurriedly. And in fact, this National Assembly had to sit several times, sometimes calling special sittings to address certain issues, to budget even for the election itself, which was a bit so hectic. And if these elections were moved to give the appropriations time, that will serve Kenyans very well, Mr. Speaker. For those reasons, I support.
The Honorable Guchine, member for Central Imende. We shall then have the Honorable Mawade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. I rise to oppose this intended amendment. This will be a very huge disservice to the Kenyans. And the reason is because most voters tend to register during the registration period, which is done probably in a period of about 6 months to 1 year or so at their place where they tend to work. So if we put the voting date in December and they have registered mostly in the major cities, or rather in the main towns, and they go home for Christmas, then those are voters that will not be able to vote because nobody will be allowed to, will agree to pay his own, his fare to come back to where they stay, be it in Nairobi, Mombasa, or any other city. Mr. Speaker, also we talk about the putting the elections in December. The elections and the campaigns tend to intensify approximately 2 months or so to the elections. So if we put the elections in the third week of December as hereby suggested or proposed, then we will be during the exam time, when our students are doing their KCPE in October and November and KCSE, that's when the campaigns will be actually at their climax. So this is an ill-advised amendment of the Constitution. The Constitution, and also there's no need to rush and amend the Constitution on this particular motion. So with those few remarks, together with the others that have been stated before me, I rise to oppose. Thank you.
The Honorable Twitoek Komoren, member for Mogotia. We shall then have the Honorable Kitty Chonga, member for Kilifi South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to contribute to this. I've listened to quite a number of sentiments. My fellow members have adduced on this. But, Mr. Speaker, I beg to oppose this amendment for just very, very few reasons which have also been discussed, only that I just want to emphasize. The most crucial thing here surrounding December, to me, relates to the exams which our boys and girls sit. As a nation, we know very well we have a duty to make sure that we protect the youth. Protection of the youth starts from when now they start to sit for the exams, because this is the time when now their future is being determined. When the elections were said to be conducted in August, I'm very sure there are men and women out there who actually considered quite a number of reasons as to why this exercise has to be done in August. As a nation, we need to protect the youth, because the youth are the future of this country. And that's why we would wish to have the month of December actually specifically reserved for quite a number of the activities have to be conducted. Whoever is willing to vote in August can comfortably vote, and whatever reason he may not be able to vote, I'm sure even if it is put in December.
Most of our social activities are done around December. If you go to my village, you go to most parts of Kenya, where we even conduct circumcision, Mr. Speaker, we do it in the month of December because it's naturally a convenient date for everybody else. Mr. Speaker, over years, and the laws are made based on the cultures and the values and the practices of the people, we have done most of our major activities as a country around the month of December, Mr. Speaker. If you look at the changes that we have made, Mr. Speaker, most of those changes we made to August have actually affected our ways of living, our practices, and it's not good for the country, Mr. Speaker. That's why, Mr. Speaker, I'm supporting the amendment to move this date to December because it's a natural date for the Kenyans and it's a natural date for our children because they are already tuned. They already have it at the back of their mind that the best time to do an exam is around that time. And most of them by December, Mr. Speaker, they'll have finished the exams because like now, they're starting exam in 2 weeks' time. And by end of November, Mr. Speaker, most of them will have finished the exam. They will be at home. It's the longest holiday, educational holiday that we have in the country. And there's no reason why we cannot pick on that date because it's the most convenient date for Kenyans, Mr. Speaker. Number two, Mr. Speaker, part of the reasons why we have had chaos after the elections, Mr. Speaker, is because our people who register as voters never end up going to vote, never end up going to the village, Mr. Speaker, because they look at their income, they look at their program, and they don't find August to be a convenient date. They're only given 2 days to travel to up-country to go and vote, and even around that time, the traffic is very heavy, Mr. Speaker, and somebody naturally would want to look at the cost-benefit analysis. What is it there for him to travel up-country so that you can go and support the electoral process, and they choose not to go, Mr. Speaker. And you end up having a huge number of registered voters, but the actual number of people who vote are so few. Mr. Speaker, it will enhance the transparency. It will enhance the opportunities of people getting a chance to elect leaders of their choice. Because if we don't do that, Mr. Speaker, we end up with people who are not, ordinarily would not have won, and we allowed everybody else to participate in an election exercise in a date which is convenient to every other Kenyan, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if you look at the cycle of our finance reporting, even as a country, the country reports finances at the end of the year. If you look at the corporates, the corporate world, the companies, Mr. Speaker, most of them, they do their financial reporting at the end of the year, which is around December, November, December. And therefore, it's easier for anybody who is working in a company to get permission off, to get a few days off around December, because already they are accustomed, they are already tuned in their mind that this is a holiday season, they have an opportunity to go home and be with the family members. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few reasons, I propose that we support this bill because we tried last Parliament, Mr. Speaker, and the argument were making a lot of sense, but I think because most people were scared of the timing, they thought the voters will be up in arms against us, that we made a mistake, and we are paid for that.
To make an informed decision so that we can be able to vote later when you have the numbers. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I reply.
That is as it should be, the Honorable Chris Wamalwa, but you are putting the cart before the horse to say that we are going to defer, because we are presuming that we would make that decision. But let me give the opportunity to the Honorable Ashirley to make his contribution so that we can come to that which we have alluded to, hopefully.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Honorable Chris Wamalwa has preempted, but despite that, Mr. Speaker, I am aware that Standing Order number 53-2 demands that after end of debate of a bill or a motion, you are meant to put a question. But, Mr. Speaker, I was raising on standing order number 53.3 that I request you, going by the number I'm seeing in the House, that you defer putting of the question until a later date, so that we can be able to ask members. Mr. Speaker, this bill, or rather this debate is just coming after we have had a long recess. And in most cases, members may not have been there, not because they don't like the proposed bill, but because of the inconvenience caused. Two, Mr. Speaker, you are aware that many members have left for Mombasa on an official trip, or otherwise they are preparing to leave for Mombasa to prepare for the Speaker's round table with the capture team. And because of the flights, Mr. Speaker, some members have already left, especially the ones that are on the Committee of Budget. I'm aware of this because I'm in leadership, Mr. Speaker, and that's why I'm able to inform the House what is happening. Therefore, I just want to beg and request you again that you defer putting the question as per the standing order number 53.3. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Washali, your application is well grounded. Honorable members, you will note, I'm sure you are aware that this is a bill that requires a two-thirds majority under our Constitution, Article 256. And for the reasons that have been offered by the Honorable Washali, I will direct that the putting of the question on this particular one will be deferred to such a time that our House Business Committee will allocate it a time for us to come and take that vote. So, Honorable Chris, it is up to you now to rally the members so that you can get the necessary numbers, of course, with the help of the Honorable Ashiali. And probably at that time, the Honorable Okello, you might have an opportunity, if the House agrees with the Honorable Chris Wamalwa, to pass, then you will have an opportunity to have a bite at the cherry at that time. So it is not all lost. There's still hope. What is out of order? The Honorable Wanyonyi.
The Speaker, I think going by what Honorable Osiali, as a whip, said, and given the prayers from Honorable Chris Wamalwa, I would take that we take an exception that when we are actually going for calling for the voting, we give again Chris Wamalwa the time to reply, because most members are not here and may not have known exactly the whole thing. So I think it's out of order, but we can take that as an exception, Mr. Speaker, so that you can be able to understand the goal of the whole thing.
The Honorable Ferdinand Wanyonyi, I know probably you wanted your voice to be heard as your members from your constituency were here. But I know, I know that you also know the standing orders. Once we have closed and the Honorable Chris has done what he has done, we cannot reopen it. So we will just abide by the rules. I know we've come from recess. It might not be at the tips of our fingertips, but we know the rules. We shall abide by the rules. So I have directed that, the putting of the vote to be deferred to a time that the House Business Committee will allocate time for such. I'll therefore direct that we move to the next order.
Article 206 of the Constitution of Kenya and the Public Finance Management Act, in bracket National Government Affirmative Action, Regulation 2016, supports affirmative action for youths, and aware that in the Appropriation Act 2018, youth empowerment programs were only allocated about 7.3 billion. This House urges that the government declares youth unemployment a national disaster and further establish a youth fund of at least 5% of national revenue collected each year to be administered by an authority or a commission for purposes of youth empowerment and employment. Mr. Speaker, as I urge this motion, I wanted to remind us of the very glaring statistics that inform the question of youth unemployment. Mr. Speaker, the statistics, and I refer here to the International Labour Organization, ILO, indicates that unemployment, and I wish to make corrections by saying this to the statistics in the motion, that the ILO has put unemployment in Kenya at 11.5%. Compared to our neighbors, Mr. Speaker, Congo is at 10.9%, South Africa at 27.3%. Now, interestingly, Mr. Speaker and members, our neighbors Uganda are at 2.1% and Rwanda at 1.3%, Tanzania at 1.3%. Mr. Speaker, the unemployment rate by the Kenya Bureau of Statistics puts unemployment of youth at 19.2%. I also wanted us to remind ourselves of the population statistics in respect of what is the threshold of the youth in respect of youth under 35%. And the US-based Population Reference Bureau, that's the PRB, has indicated that 35% of the Kenyan population is under the age of 18, which makes the question of youth a very important issue, not only for this House, but also for our nation at this time. Mr. Speaker, an eminent English writer by the name Charles Dickens, writing in the 17th century, once said, "Let us strike the key notes before we pursue the tune." So, Mr. Speaker, allow me to pursue the keynotes on this matter. Mr. Speaker, the single most important challenge of our generation, the single most important and biggest dilemma that this 12th Parliament, and I stand to be corrected, will grapple with, in my view, the single most important issue that if this House can resolve in this 12th Parliament is the question of youth unemployment. Mr. Speaker, we have grappled with this issue since independence, from the time of our first founding president till now. The youth have continuously been told that the youths are the leaders of tomorrow. We have, Mr. Speaker, said that the youth are being the leaders of tomorrow. We have established the National Youth Service in this respect. Mr. Speaker, sir, we have also set out the Youth Enterprise Fund, and I wanted to go through very quickly some of the milestones that we have done in terms of administrative and legislative measures. We have also put in place an administrative fund that is referred to as the Youth Enterprise Fund. We have also put in place by a ministerial fiat or a presidential decree the Uwezo Fund, which has now been christened the Biashara Fund. Mr. Speaker, we have also established a youth empowerment authority in terms of legislations that this House has done. That is Act number 3 of 2016. We have also enacted the Social Assistance Act of 2011. Mr. Speaker, we have partnered with various organizations, both local and international, all in a bid to try and grapple and tackle the question of youth unemployment. But, Mr. Speaker, we have still not struck the keynote. Resolving this question of youth unemployment, Mr. Speaker, would, in my view, be an equalizer, not only for the 290 constituencies that we represent, but for this nation. It is for this reason, Mr. Speaker, that I brought this motion, and I wanted to just reference it because I have indicated in my motion, Mr. Speaker, that in urging this, the House considers establishing a statutory fund. And I want to distinguish, Mr. Speaker, the difference between a statutory fund, which I am urging in this motion, and administrative or ministerial funds that we have in the form of Uwezo Fund, the Youth Enterprise Fund, and other funds which are arbitrarily, in my view, administered and are not benchmarked in the league of, for example, the CDF, which is benchmarked at 2.5%, There is a political parties fund, statutorily created under political parties fund, benchmarked at 0.03%. And there is also the NGAF fund, which has also been established. These funds, the ones that have been established by statute, Mr. Speaker, as opposed to the ones that are administratively put or by ministerial fiat, have created a lot of impact. They are measurable. The things that CDF has done over the years since the enactment of CDF are revolutionary, and they are physical. They are verifiable, unlike what we have seen happening with the Uwezo Fund and the Youth Enterprise Fund. Mr. Speaker, before I get to the legislations that I wanted to review, and in the tail end suggest why we must collapse all these pieces of legislation littered all over the place and have one umbrella piece of legislation, a one-stop shop where you will find all questions of youth addressed and answered. I wanted to remind us, Mr. Speaker, of what the Constitution that we passed says about the motion or the questions before us today. Mr. Speaker, Article 43 of the Constitution speaks to the questions of economic and social rights. I am particularly, my attention is particularly drawn to 43 sub-article E that talks about every person has the right to social security. This motion, in effect, if implemented, will be speaking to the question of the social security and empowerment of the youth in this country. Article 55 of the Constitution is perhaps more instructive, Mr. Speaker. It says that the state shall take measures, including affirmative action programs, to ensure that the youth, A, access relevant education and training, have opportunities to associate, be represented, and participate in political, social, economic, and other spheres of life, access employment, and are protected from harmful cultural practices and exploitation. The purpose of this motion, Mr. Speaker, which will culminate into a bill which is already in draft form, is to try and actualize the provisions of Article 55 of the Constitution. I also wanted to draw our attention to Article 56, because the youth at some point could be considered to be minorities and marginalized, notwithstanding the statistics that indicate that about 35% or more of our population are of youthful age. Article 56 says that the state shall take or put in place affirmative action, and this fund and whatever is being proposed in this motion is being done in form of a requirement to put in place an affirmative action to be able to bridge the gap of the questions of unemployment and the problems that the youths find themselves into. It talks about the state shall put in place affirmative action programs designed to ensure that minorities and marginalized groups, C, are provided special opportunities and access to employment. Mr. Speaker, the question will perhaps arise, with the stringent budget that this country has had to grapple with recently, the question of VAT, where are we going to find the funds? Mr. Speaker, the first spot or stock also lost about 3 or 3.5 billion in the Ruaraka scandal itself. In the SGR, fake compensation, land compensation, it is said that we have lost close to about 2 billion, Mr. Speaker. Lastly, on this question, KRA, through uncollected taxes and by closing the tax gaps, we have lost close to about 100 billion. So yes, we can find money to be able to fund a statutory fund for the youth and be able to give gainful employment to the youth, as opposed to the tokenism that we give to the youth through the Uwezo and the other funds. The other issue that I wanted us to address, Mr. Speaker, and which I want to persuade the members to find, is that through Uwezo, when you tell youths in Mathare constituency, in Ruaraka, that puts the youth on some kind of tokenism and Panadol which does not assist them, we have other pieces of legislation, and in the end, Mr. Speaker, I will be coming up.
The Honorable Watch will have an extra minute or two to just have. I think what you are doing is important. Yes.
National Youth Employment, Empowerment and Services Act that will collapse all those acts that I've indicated, will collapse all those administrative funds that don't have much impact, put it into one umbrella and modeled around the CDF with branches at every constituency and committees. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I want to conclude by saying what the late Wangari Maathai said. The late Wangari empowerment. And I want to invite the Honorable John Kiarie, with whom I share this little thing, to stand and second the motion. I beg to move.
The Honorable John Kiarie, you will have your say on this little thing that you have, together with the Honorable Dwach. Proceed. Give him the mic. The Honorable Kiarie, have you inserted your card? I can't see your card here. Do you have your card with you? You can give him to the next one. There, right there. But the Honorable Kiarie, if you are going to want to be speaking to these little things, then you should remember to carry your card with you.
I always do, Mr. Speaker. I always do, Mr. Speaker, as you know.
Proceed.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm very honored to actually be seconding this very important and timely motion by the honorable member representing Mathare constituency, Honorable Anthony Oluoch, who indeed actually was my senior in the university and has been carrying this little thing about the youth for many years. It is known that I do come from a performance background, and one of the platforms that I bounced onto was the creation of the Honorable Oluoch, which is called the Culture Week at the Kenyatta University. Mr. Speaker, it is not lost to this House that if there is any calamity that is facing this country, it is the youth bulge. And in fact, in many occasions, it has been said that the youth bulge in this country is actually a ticking bomb. But to some of us who bounced into politics on the platform of the youth agenda, we know that this time bomb is also in itself an opportunity, Mr. Speaker. And as such, we want to grab this opportunity and run with it and do something not only for this generation, but actually for the next generation. I'm reminded, Mr. Speaker, of the very wise words of the former president of Liberia, Madam Ellen Johnson, by noting that one amazing thinker by the name of Simone Sinek once said that leadership is not about thinking about the next election. It is actually about thinking about the next generation. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do second.
Honorable members, allow me to propose the question. That aware that 75% of Kenya's population is under 35 years of age, and that overall unemployment among youth is at 55%, cognizant of the government's plan in the Big Four agenda, aimed at creating 1.3 million manufacturing jobs by 2022, appreciating that Article 260 of the Constitution defines youth, while the Public Finance Management Act, National Government Affirmative Action Fund, Regulations 2016 create basic structures that support affirmative action for the youth, aware that in the Appropriation Act 2018, Youth Empowerment Program was allocated a paltry sum of Kenya shillings 7,352,220,651. This House urges that the government declares youth unemployment as a national disaster and further establishes a national youth fund of at least 5% of the national revenue collected each year to be administered by an authority or commission for purpose of youth empowerment and deployment. Honorable members, the very first person, member on my list is the Honorable Odwol Adhiambo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak on this important motion. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support and contribute to this motion from the grounds of the significance that we create to our development and the manner in which we as leaders in the Assembly, as well as leaders that are in government and other places, are focused solely and squarely on ensuring that Kenya does not only grow to improve, but indeed to realize its ideals. Mr. Speaker, it has been indicated that 78% of the population is younger than 35 years, and that 70% of those that we see are indeed unemployed. As I support this and thank Honorable Antonio Loch for bringing this into focus, I'd like us, Mr. Speaker, to focus on the significance of declaring a matter a national disaster. A number of times we are going to find that we confuse calamities or catastrophes, or we use language that would talk about anything that is tragic, and that we fail to acknowledge that when we are talking about a national disaster, we truly want to bring the attention of the entire country of not only the tragedy or the difficulties or the challenges, but indeed to point out that if it is not addressed, it is a matter that will affect everyone. We are talking, Mr. Speaker, about the youth, but in effect, we are really talking about our country, Kenya. We are talking about the elderly. We are talking about the women. We are talking about the children. I say this, Mr. Speaker, because if we look at the level of unemployment and we check the manner in which our youth, that we are clearly saying are a very significant percentage are affected, we will see that we have untold problems. We have all cases of insecurity. We have our youth being affected and sometimes losing hope and getting into drug abuse. We have situation, declaration of youth unemployment as a national disaster, and in particular to ensure there's a fund to go with it. I conclude, Mr. Speaker, by saying that success is predictable and so is failure. And if we want to succeed in our agenda and to ensure that our country is sustained, we truly must take action and we must look to the issue of the youth. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Asante Bwana Spika kunipatia nafasi hii. Ningependa mwanzo kuchukua nafasi hii kumshukuru Mheshimiwa Oloch kwa jambo hili 9 ya Kenya youth hawajaajiriwa, ambao ni kiwango kikubwa ukipima pamoja na majirani zetu Tanzania, Uganda na wengine. County ninayowakilisha Lamu, Kenya Bureau of Standard also of Statistics walitoa 68%, ambao ni kiwango kikubwa sana ya vijana wetu hawajaajiriwa. Kutoajiriwa husababisha kuweka viwanda, shida nyingi, vijana wetu kukosa kazi. Serikali pia kwa mipango yake saa nyingine husababisha watu wakakosa kazi zaidi. Kwa mfano Lamu, shirika la Lapset lilivyoanza limewafanya wavuvi wengi hawawezi kwenda baharini, kwa hiyo imechangia ukosefu wa ajira. Kiwanda ambacho kinataka kuwekwa cha kiwanda cha makaa. Sehemu hiyo kulikuwa na wakulima wamekaa hapo miaka 3, wakingojea walipwe, waliambiwa watalipwa, so wamekuwa hawalimi. Imekosesha pia kwa ukubwa kazi, ajira. Wengi tena ni vijana. Pia mpangilio wa serikali walivyoweka katazo la kukata mikoko limechangia pakubwa Lamu ukosefu wa ajira. Kwa kukisia familia 3,000 zimekosa ajira. So mipango hii itasaidia pakubwa. Na kitu kingine ambayo inachangia zaidi pia ni ile kutegemeana. Ukosefu wa ajira, wale ambao wana kazi wanakuwa wanategemewa na familia.
What Honorable Didi Nyoro seem to have pressed an intervention. What is out of order?
What is out of order?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just lining up for a contribution.
Yeah, but that is not the route to use. That is a back door route.
Blame my neighbor.
Use the front door.
Mr. Speaker, blame my neighbor for that.
Very well. Please, Honorable Mohammed, you have the floor.
Asante. Kutegemeana kwa lugha ya Kimombo tunaweza sema ni high dependency ratio, ambayo Kenya ni 75%. Wale kidogo ambao wameandikwa kazi ubidi wawasaidie wale wengine ambao hawajaandikwa kazi. Na Bwana Speaker, naomba mniongezee time yangu ilichukuliwa. Okay, mswada huu utaweza kuwapatia imani vijana na itawapatia matumaini, na itakuwa tumewasaidia hawa vijana wawe tofauti na miaka mingine iliyopita. So
yes, Honorable Mohammed, every member has 5 minutes, and we are scientific in measuring that. So you'd have to organize your thoughts. Honorable Martin Owino.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support this motion, and let me thank Mr. Honorable Antonio Lodge and Kiari, who seconded this. Mr. Speaker, this is also my passion. Little things can be big things. So this is a big one. In my constituency in Dewa, unemployment is among these youth are beyond the national average. Actually, it's about 65. Whether you're going to school or not, it's the same thing. Mr. Speaker, it is a disaster already in households and in my constituency. For example, there's a family of 5 children. They only had 5 oxen to plow their farm. And because the firstborn got admission in college, they had to dispose one oxen after the other. At the end of it, the lad finished the college, but retreated home, no job for the past 10 years. And this firstborn was supposed to get a job and uplift other siblings. That did not happen. So the poverty in this house has gone higher than any other family. And it is across the constituency. And I know this is across the country. That's why we are asking for a declaration of a national disaster. Mr. Speaker, when there is unemployment of this magnitude among the youth, it brings down the income, the living standard declines, the working power of the nation declines, revenue goes down, the productivity. Mr. Speaker, this is the year where the production of the country depends. The UN explains this as between 15 and 24, but now we are even spanning to the senior youth, even beyond 35. Somebody finishing a college and taking many years before they can even get a job. So when they fall into the frustration domain, then crime starts. Mr. Speaker, poverty
is in the highest level because these people are not being absorbed into the work domain. Transfer of skills. When you finish education, you need to be engaged in order to maintain that. That is also going beyond, down the valley. This will have a domino effect. In fact, if we are not careful on this, Mr. Speaker, we may end up in a recession because we are not tapping into the productivity domain of these people. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if, for example, we are talking about the dual highway, Mombasa, 300 billion to be used. How about if we were to invest this money, even $1 billion per constituency, to build micro industries, to create jobs for these people? We would be improving lives, yes, but also taxes, because I say this is a productive age, where if you engage them in work, they will pay taxes. So I think, Mr. Speaker, Honorable Olwach is right. We have to make a statutory arrangement so that even if loans are to be taken, this House should be consulted. Because I think we are crying of unemployment on the other side, but the decision that we make does not support what we are going through as a nation. Mr. Speaker, there is also a social aspect of this. Because of unemployment rate that high, debt is increasing, homelessness, migration to the cities to look for jobs, crimes.
Yes, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Speaker. I rise to support this motion for declaring a youth unemployment as a national disaster. I think the issue of the youth, Mr. Speaker, is very serious. Currently, we have so many graduates which are exiting various institutions with no hope of getting jobs. I know we've come up with the WESO Fund, the Youth Fund, but, Mr. Speaker, these particular funds are not doing an effective job. This particular motion, seeking to establish a national fund along the lines of CDF, is a very noble thing, and I want to rise to say this is the line we need to support. We've seen that the WESO Fund is not doing what it was meant to do. It was meant to support the youth to start up various businesses, to be able to enable them to even get various jobs, but we are not achieving that. And I think the reason is that it is not a grant, it is a loan. The current WESO Fund, the Youth Fund, I know the WESO Fund is free of interest, but the Youth Fund and the Women Enterprise Fund are actually funds which are given out on the basis of interest rates. I think this particular agenda of the youth should be treated as one of the big four agendas. I know the idea of establishing a manufacturing sector to create jobs is a noble idea, but I think we can do a better job if we focus on constituencies. I'd like to say this particular motion of setting aside a certain percentage of funds specifically to support job creation for the youth is already an overdue agenda. I want to say that we will be solving the biggest unemployment which is going on at the moment. At the moment, the youth are looking for jobs everywhere, and they are not getting. In fact, one of the biggest challenges we have as members of parliament is the issue of placing the youth various jobs, to get various jobs. The government is not employing. There are actually low employment going on. Creation of jobs is also at a very low level. And therefore, if we specifically set aside funds to be able to focus on youth employment, to focus on job creation, especially at the constituency level, along the lines of CDF, I think a bigger success may be achieved. Currently, this issue of youth is really not being given as serious attention as supposed to be. I think when we talk of the big four, we are talking in terms of expanding the economy, but I think we should also have the agenda as a specific agenda. Therefore, I rise to say this motion is overdue, that we need to focus on the youth. we need to find a way in which we can increase employment. We can also support youth polytechnics to train more youth. This money, which this fund, if it's created, should specifically also be targeted at training the youth. That is giving them skills, especially sponsoring them to attend various youth polytechnics and DTIs. This will actually go a long way to reducing the youth unemployment, which is currently prevalent in the nation. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I rise to say I support this motion. It has been overdue. Thank you.
Honorable Mogaka Kemosi, member for West Mugirango. Very well. That member also seemed to have left the card behind. Honorable Osotsi Godfrey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to contribute to this very, very important motion by Madare Member of Parliament, my good friend, Honorable Anthony Oloch, to declare the national youth unemployment as a national disaster and establish the National Youth Fund. Mr. Speaker, this motion is timely because the youth of this country, who form over 75% of the population, are carriers of our social problem. Drug problem, poverty, unemployment, disease, crime, terrorism, all manner of social problems. The youth are the ones who suffer the most. And Mr. Speaker, the issue of youth is a critical issue that requires attention of all the leaders in this country. Because I think we have not given it the focus we need to give it as a country. I know a lot has been done in terms of affirmative action for women and even for other socially disadvantaged groups. But I think on matters to do with youth, we have handled them very casually. Recently, when we were discussing about the budget estimates, you saw most of the austerity measures that were done on the budget were directed to programs affecting the youth. We talk about incubators, they were removed from the budget. We talk about Konza City, it also experienced a budget cut. So that indicates to you, Mr. Speaker, that we are not taking matters of youth seriously. And yet, in the Vision 2030 that was formulated during President Kibaki's regime, the youth empowerment was identified as one of the things that are required to be done to propel this country in terms of development. But what has been done? We have a number of various youth initiatives, which I think Honorable Luoch is proposing that all these initiatives, be they the Youth Enterprise Development Fund, WEZO Fund, and whatever it is, be all amalgamated into the National Youth Fund. And I think that would be very progressive. But Mr. Speaker, I want to also say that we should not create a fund to give youth money the way the National Youth Enterprise Fund is doing, which has been turned into a political fund, where you go, you are given money, there is no commitment on repaying, and that money is being distributed on political lines. We want a fund that is progressive.
Support this motion, and I want to thank the Honorable Oluoch for this timely motion. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, this country we have always, because a lot of the good motions that come and the proposals that we do have in this country, they end up not reaching the people that they need to reach, because they end up being as centered and administered in areas that are not exactly reaching the grassroots, and in this case, the rural areas don't get to feel this. So I do support that it would be good to have this, because obviously CDF has done very well. Many people have felt it. It has reached the far corners of this country, and I know that youths that are far out there in the villages would be able to access this benefit if this fund would be modeled around the CDF model. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, allow me to rope in the government's commitment on the Big Four. Mr. Speaker, if all of us speak to the Big Four as it stands now, nothing of that explains the role of the youth in the Big Four. If you talk about manufacturing, by the time the youth get access to that role of manufacturing, the bus would have already left. If you talk about affordable health care, again, it's the same thing, because if we do not empower the youth, then they're not able to plug into this big agenda that the government is driving. So I do believe that whereas the president meant well in this Agenda 4, I think if we do not move along with everybody alongside with us, then we shall have missed an opportunity to have a big proportion and a big population of this country also benefit and also help drive this agenda to its success, the success that we all envisage. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, when I grow up, Mr. Speaker, and I also have my own little thing, and I have an opportunity to do an Agenda 4, I think I'll do Agenda 4 as number 1 agenda, Youth Agenda 4 as Agenda 4, Agenda 2 of the youth agenda, Agenda 3, the youth, and Agenda 4, the youth, because that is the future of this country. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I support.
Member Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me a chance to also add my voice to this important motion. And let me just say that it is a motion that is familiar to many of us who have been here before. And therefore, even as we pass it, I think we need to start asking ourselves very hard questions as the leadership of this country, because this House is actually constituted by the leaders of this country. Mr. Speaker, we have a youth fund already in place. What do we need to do to the existing youth fund so that it adds more value to the youth of this country? What is it that is being done that has worked? And what has not worked, and what do we do about it? Because there's no need of reinventing the wheel as far as I'm concerned. We need first to know where we've gone wrong with what we have so that we know what needs to be done to make it better. Mr. Speaker, we have a very good program called the ACPO program that helps in access of youth, women, and persons with disability to the procurement of this country, of the government. The biggest spender in any nation is government. 30% of ACPO is supposed to go to that category of groups. Where have we gone wrong with ACPO? Why isn't it working to the point that out of the earmarked 200 billion that is supposed to support those sectoral groups that I've mentioned, they are doing less than somebody strategically ensuring that this money doesn't go to the youth, to the women, so that it continues to go to the same people over and over again? Are there certain obstacles that are still on the way of these young people, of these, the women and others, so that they are able to fully take advantage of this very good program? I think these are the questions we must begin to ask ourselves, because we will come here every term, pass very good things about youth, but very little is happening out there. Within ACPO, what stops you, the Member of Parliament, with your CDF, from giving certain tenders to young youth-owned companies? Today, if we ask the members of Parliament here who have CDF in their constituencies, even affirmative action, how many of them have gone out of their way consciously to make sure they give tenders to youth-owned companies? I'm sure less than 5% will say, I have done it. So the challenge starts with all of us. It cannot be always pointing a finger and then Mufanye, you go do it. It must also start with we seated here. So I want us to go beyond lip service into real action. And while this motion is well intended by Mheshimiwa Oluoch, we must now make it happen. We must walk the talk. We must lead by example. Start with your CDF. Start with your affirmative action fund. And then let us hold government accountable to make sure that the programs they have in place do actually help the people they are intended to help. Let us see what went wrong with Youth Fund, what is happening with ACPO, and then from there we are sure we'll do the right thing. With those many remarks, I support, but I say let's go beyond talking. Let us act.
Honorable Bui Robert, member for Kadhiani.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. I think that was a very powerful presentation from the Deputy Whip of the majority. And I think it's important that we all realize that the future of this country is actually with the youth, and that it is our responsibility as members to also show direction and probably try and put these things into action. Mr. Speaker, from the presentation by the Honorable Oluoch, we are realizing here that 75% of this nation is of people aged below 35 years. And his request financially is only 5%. I mean, when you do that mathematics, I think it's really not asking for too much. Mr. Speaker, I've also done some simple mathematics, and I want to say that I'm happy with the Honorable Oluoch, being my colleague in this house, also a colleague in NASA, and also a colleague of victims of political violence, because our legs were broken one day apart from each other. I think he's done a very good thing. I've listened to these statistics, and we are talking about 55% of the youth being unemployed. That is 55% of 75% of the Republic, and that works out to actually 41.25% of the citizens of this country being unemployed. Mr. Speaker, I think that's obviously a national disaster. I am happy about my colleague who has talked about, the Honorable Cecily, has talked about there being many funds. It's true. We have the Youth Enterprise Fund, we have the Uwezo Fund, we have even they are not enough. So I've tried to figure out this, and I've asked myself, what is the problem that we are facing? And I think, Mr. Speaker, I have noticed a few problems since I was elected, also concerning our youth. And the first one, I think, Mr. Speaker, is the issue of the mindset. A lot of our youth come out of university, come out of school, and expect to be employed because they have good papers. The reality on the ground is that really there are not enough jobs. And so maybe the issue of employment by others needs to now start being reconsidered. And they need to start figuring out how to probably themselves become employers so that they could also adapt. Maybe those who are educated can be employers and also employ their colleagues who have not gotten the higher levels of education. I've also noticed that there's a problem or a difficulty in getting employed, despite the fact that some of them have very good papers. Those who choose to look for employment have barriers. We have this barrier of higher education loans board you have to have cleared, and yet you have not been employed. We have a barrier of the DCI asking for, a certificate of good conduct that costs money, which we don't have. There's a barrier of ESCC. You have not even worked anywhere. You're supposed to get a clearance from the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, which you can only obviously have committed some criminal or corruption offense if you're probably working in the system of government. There is also the issue of credit worthiness, getting, credit reference bureau so that you can get employed. And also credit reference bureau whenever it comes to issues to do with borrowing. We also have another problem, and this is us, the politicians. We constantly misuse our youth, and we deceive them. I remember about 3-4 years ago in last Parliament, when youth of Machakos County were invited to the Machakos People's Park. That is a big, big stadium. And they were promised all manner of heaven, and they were told they will get employment, and very big banners were put all over. And these youth came from all over the county, even some also from outside the county. And the expectation was that they would go and register. And the advert was that you will come in as seeking for employment, and you meet employers, and right there you get employed. So a lot of youth were there in their thousands and thousands, tens of thousands. But I'll tell you that from the ones I represent, we've not had any getting employed through that initiative. So there is misuse of youth by politicians, which constantly happens whenever we are near an election, because of course the youth have the numbers to ensure that someone gets elected into office. So it is important, Mr. Speaker, that we try and address these issues. Now, I want to propose quick solutions because my time is running out, and the first one would be we find a way of training our youth and create.
Very well. Honorable. Order, Honorable. The measuring of the time is quite scientific. You'd have to order your... but nevertheless, I heard from the mover that there will be a bill around this issue. So clearly there will even be further opportunities. Honorable Okelo Odoyo, member for Nyando.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you. Recently, Kenya National Bureau of Statistics carried out a survey that did paint a grim picture on the unemployment levels in this country. Mr. Speaker, we got to learn that over 8 million Kenyans are unemployed. 2 million of that figure are desperately looking for work to this very day. Some of them have actually gone back to school to further their studies in the hope that after regraduation, will put their hands in some gainful employment. Even the few who have jobs, Mr. Speaker, most of them are in low cadre, poor paying jobs, and most are constantly exploited by their employers. Then what awaits them again is the family responsibilities. There is already a very thin monetary gain from these few people. But then the family pressure in terms of budgetary allocations are exerted on this small money that at the end of the day, we see nothing but a gleeful picture on these families. Youth unemployment has been described as a ticking bomb, Mr. Speaker, with frustrated young men and women susceptible to drugs, prostitution, some lured into terrorism and other indoctrinated groups that create harm to our republic. Some enroll in drugs, and some are utterly desperate. The country is now banking on the manufacturing sector, which is one of the key pillars in Jubilee government's 4-point agenda. With this kind of proposed monies to handle youth affairs, it will offer a platform that will cushion and augment the manufacturing sector, and hence create employment to many desperate Kenyans. Underemployment, Mr. Speaker, is rampant, and this simply means that graduates get jobs that can as well be done by Form 4 leavers. Employment means, if this will be made into a bill and will be an act, that it will create a wider tax base, that more tax revenues will be in place, strong purchasing power will follow, and hence a stable nation. So instead of overtaxing the few who are employed, let us widen the scope of employment so that the government does not necessarily have to impose heavy penalties on Kenyans, but with a wider taxation base, there will be adequate revenue to run our affairs. I, in retrospect, therefore, support the declaration of youth unemployment as a national disaster and subsequent establishment of a national youth fund. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Shall we have Honorable Dawood Lahim?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would want to support this motion, but there are a few things the mover of the motion said earlier, and I think I need to correct him in what he said. When he said that the betting in the bill was reduced, the 35%, I believe he did not understand it. It was never reduced. What was done was a reallocation. The 35% still stands. 35% in the sense that 15% is the betting companies and 20% goes to the people who win the bets. Like the one who won yesterday is going to pay
cumbersome. Therefore, you find youth are really frustrated all over. Youth cannot get employed because of so many strings attached on some of these employments. And there's an outcry whereby most of the youth, Mr. Speaker, are crying all over that the old are being recycled for the jobs and making them not to have anything to do or anything to support them in their endeavors. As much as we have put the middle colleges, like the polytechnics and so forth, but they still be asked to go and pay money for help for them to be cleared to get an employment somewhere. So arrangements will be made so that some of these youth, once they come out of these TVETs from university, they are able to be innovators, they are able to start small businesses or small companies whereby most of them will be able to employ others and they'll be able to exercise what they have learned from the colleges. And also maybe the fund that is there already that is existing, the youth fund, there are also strings attached which are making the youth shy away from it. So once this National Youth Fund is established, this can make the rules are put in place and every mechanism put in place, then the youth are able to acquire the funds and make them get more or start small industries that can be of use and also employ other youth. Mr. Speaker, sir, this is a time. Somebody was talking of the 4 agenda and he has talked about the youth and the youth. This is a time bomb in the waiting. Things must be set up. This fund should be set up so that it can assist our youth instead of our youth idling. We have seen so many youth out there taking drugs, doing what? Because now some of them, they are hopeless. And to restore a sense of hope, this youth needs to be established so that our youth can have something to do. For this matter, Mr. Speaker, sir, I support this motion.
Honorable Olesankok David.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. Honorable Speaker,
And from the onset, let me say that I support the motion by Honorable Anthony Oluoch. The motion is really timely, and I hope it will not be like other motions which we passed in this House, and then it will just collect dust in the shelves. Honorable Speaker, for sure, unemployed youth is a time bomb. One, they are vulnerable to radicalization. And you know what radicalization, especially from the Al-Shabaab wing, have done to our country. What radicalization in terms of Mungiki, Chingororos, and Baghdad boys have done to our country. So, Honorable Speaker, when youth are unemployed, they are vulnerable to be radicalized into these terror groups. Honorable Speaker, again, they are vulnerable to drug addiction, to alcoholism, to immorality. And this will not only destroy the future of our youth, but the entire future of our country. That is why, Honorable Speaker, such motions need to be discussed soberly, and for all of us to make sure that we have followed it up to the implementation stage so that there does not collect dust in our shelves. Honorable Speaker, we have also to ask ourselves, and first of all, congratulate our President for being recognized recently in America as one of the best presidents in terms of youth empowerment because of policies that he have put in place and funds that he have put in place to try and assist the youth. Now our question is, where are we going wrong in ACPO? Because ACPO was supposed to empower youth, women, and persons with disabilities. But we have not seen that empowerment trickling down into engaging our youth in productive activities that are of economic benefit to them. Honorable Speaker, we have the ways of fund. If today we ask all these members of parliament and even members of public, what is the impact of that youth fund? And that is not chicken change, have billions of shillings. Honorable Speaker, so when a fund is suggested to be formed that will be administered through CDF, Honorable Speaker, in this House, we will support, especially to be administered by our women rep, because they have shown them some level of dignity in administering the National Government Affirmative Action Fund. Honorable Speaker, I see Honorable Nyoro and Honorable KJ becoming a bit uncomfortable. Honorable Speaker, and whenever we talk of employment, let us not talk of unemployment of youth alone. Let us also talk of the percentage that will be given to persons with disability, because it is in our Constitution, Article 54, that 5% of every employment should go to persons with disability. And I think in this motion, it should be around 15%, because that is the population of persons with disability in this country. Because my time is up, Honorable Speaker, as a House, we need to give solution. One of the solutions that I believe is beneficial to us is that let us give tax exemption to importation of wood so that we can conserve our forests, destroy the forests of Uganda, destroy the forests of DRC Congo, and import that wood and manufacture furnitures, and will be exporters of furnitures. Youth will get employment there. And again, let us rethink the issue of our education system. When it's only a degree that is required, all of them cannot be managers. We must have plumbers, electricians, and mason people so that they can get employment. So let us also make sure that our education system is compatible with the job market. Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Ekamais, member for Loima.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I want to thank Honorable Anton Olot for bringing this very serious and timely motion. Honorable Speaker, I think our country is grappling with a myriad of issues, one of which is trying to stabilize the economy of this country. Secondly,
weight of this matter, that basically the youth are so unengaged that preventing them to do some of the things that they try to do to ventilate their frustrations, it becomes very difficult. Mr. Speaker, let me join the other members by describing youth and unemployment as a time bomb. The most productive age generally happens to be the youthful age. And Mr. Speaker, the wealth of our country is not in its minerals, it's not in terms of infrastructure. It is actually how well the country manages to tap in its own human resource. And if you look at what happened to South Korea, which now at one point was way below where Kenya was, and now is miles apart. If you compare with Kenya, is one of the most advanced developed worlds. And during one of the visits to Korea, South Korea, and I managed to ask one of the persons, how did you manage to get to all this? They said they borrowed some of the designs from Kenya, but they capitalized on their human resource. This big percentage of useful human resource that we are leaving behind. A country that invests so much in infrastructure and forgets to carry along the youths and every other person really is like a husband who is so busy working hard to buy sofa sets, big fridges, everything, but has no time for the wife and kids. When actually these people, all what they need is to have this person recognized and carry them along in the system. Mr. Speaker, there is a big percentage of youths who are willing to work, but unfortunately, they do not have the jobs. And they basically threatens the future of these individuals and the economy at large.
Honorable Musa Musioka, I'm afraid the House must rise. It is 1 p.m.
Thank you, Mr.
Speaker. Now, that doesn't mean your minutes are done, extinguished. You have a balance when this motion is back of 2 minutes, so that you have a total of 5 minutes.
Much obliged.
For honorable members, the motion will still find its way back. We will have a balance of that 1 minute when this motion is scheduled back by the House business. So the members who haven't spoken, we still have a balance of that 1 minute.
Thank you.
Honorable members, the time being 1 p.m., this House starts adjourned till today, Wednesday,